Jim, here's a question for you. We've always had an issue in any office or an environment that out of sight equals out of mind. How does that play in a more remote working environment or hybrid working environment?
I think that's just exacerbated even more, and there's definitely challenges of that work at home environment. I think from the employee's point of view, if you're the agent working at home, there is definitely a greater risk of you becoming a bit more lonely, a bit sort of disengaged, feeling like you're out of the loop, and that can really sort of help increase your sort of level of demotivation and disengagement with the brand if you have that isolation. And equally, if you're the supervisor back in the office, if your employees are at home, you don't have that sense of being able to walk the floor and put an arm around a shoulder and look at that body language and listen to the calls. So they're a little bit apprehensive about this work at home as well.
I guess how do you balance that then with sort of, the technology options you've got today? Because we can reach out and survey people consistently. We can even monitor them, put cameras everywhere. But then, of course, then you've got, privacy issues and everything else that goes with it. How do you find the right balance of all of that?
Technology's got a huge role to play here if they're going to be working at home. I think, and there's three main types of technology I think are going to become more important. The technologies we use now, but I think they just become more important with that work at home environment. I think firstly, we need to do a much better job of communications. Really have a ongoing, regular communication with those employees at that work environment versus at home. So you've got that sense of connection and don't feel that isolation. Secondly, I think we need to have a much better ability to monitor them, just to check in on their well-being. And yes, it could be that survey, but I think moving forward, it needs to be things like speech addicts. So you can analyse every single interaction they're having and start to pick up on how they're feeling and are they getting stressed or disengaged based on how they're sort of engaging with customers in those conversations, because you can use that technology to pick up on that and then flag that up to the supervisor. And then thirdly, I think a technology that's been around for a number of years but has never really blossomed, which is gamification. And I think that's a technology where when you're working at home, it can create that sense of connection because you can start to set team-based goals. So you're not working on your own, you're working as a virtual team towards this sort of centralized goal. And I think that's going to play a big part in the future as well.
Yeah, we do keep seeing a number of clients continue to dabble in that area. And to your point, it's really hard to get it right because it's very almost agent specific in terms of what will get them excited, what will get them engaged. And so you might get a small group of people kind of responding very well to one particular initiative and then lose the rest of the organization almost.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it's almost you're kind of getting down to a level of personalization that we hadn't been able to do before, which I think is quite interesting because, again, as those analytics come into play more and more, you're able to do the sentiment analysis. You can pinpoint those groups that are responding well to a particular initiative and other ones that are not, and then being able to focus on those and finding new ones to bring them back kind of into that cultural fold, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. Gamification is not a one approach technique. There's got to be a whole variety of different techniques that you're applying that's going to appeal to the different personality types of each employee, and then working out what those personality types are and then mapping the techniques you're applying from a gamification point of view to them is going to be a learning exercise for most contact centres because we haven't really done that yet. We tend to treat all our agents as the same. Now, they're just a cog in a machine and we've got 1,000 cogs in the machine and they're all identical. They're not. They're human beings. They've got needs, preferences, personalities, traits, and we need to explore that and understand that so we can start to apply things like gamification in a more appropriate way to them.
And it is that kind of step into that agent experience that's really quite interesting because obviously, contact centers and companies in general are often very focused on the interactions with the client and how that's going. But if you don't have the agents engaged correctly and they're not having the right experience with the company, well, that has a knock-on impact with their clients. And so how do you use those tools and technologies that we've used focused on the client interaction and say, internally, how can we make our own experiences better as well?
Yeah, exactly. If you don't have that engaged employee, you're not going to have an engaged customer because there's a direct correlation between the two. It's been proven many times over in many studies. So I think everything we do to try and make sure that employee is engaged, does want to come to work, whether that's at home on the sofa or whether that's in the actual office, that's a really important thing because without that engagement, they're not going to put what I say is discretionary effort. They're not going to go above and beyond to help that customer. And that's when you get that wow factor in the customer experience, when they go out of their way to help that customer and solve their problems. And that's, I think, going to become increasingly important as the customer service department overall becomes the thing that makes or breaks the customer experience. Because the more consumers do online via self-service, whether it's buying the product, getting support on the product, the more that one time they call the customer service department is the time that brand has to live up to that experience level. And so if that employee is disengaged, then that's going to be a big failure, and that's going to drive the churn of that.
It's a really interesting point, because obviously we're moving more and more towards digital channels, but those experiences are becoming commoditized almost. They just have to work seamlessly. And then it is that point where the agent has to interact. That's the differentiating factor.
Yeah,
really.
Absolutely. And the interesting add-on to that is, by the time that consumer connects to that employee, they've probably already tried 3 or 4 different channels. So they're not coming in at a level emotional state. They're already probably a little bit fed up, because they've tried this, they've tried that, the chatbots let them down, whatever. So by the time they get through to that agent, they're already a little bit exasperated. So now it's up to that agent to do a good job. And if that agent's not on it, if the agent's not engaged and wanting to do the best, there's going to be a disaster in terms of the experience.